Hello and welcome to the second episode of our podcast for WSSTL 2025. I am Furqan and today we have with us an esteemed guest, Professor Maria Attard. Professor Attard is the head of geography and the director of Institute of Climate Change and Sustainable Development at the University of Malta. Professor Attard is a leading expert in urban mobility, active travel and citizen engagement. Welcome to the podcast, Professor Attard. I want to start this podcast with a very important segment, which is walking and cycling, wherein you have also worked a lot, and which is very relevant to the theme of this symposium. So, walking and cycling, which is often referred to as active travel, why do you think that the cities should prioritize these modes of travel?
Well, there is a plenty of evidence that suggests that walking and cycling are our fastest way to decarbonize, particularly decarbonize transport within cities. All the efforts going into the electrification, for example, of transportation systems will not be effective enough to reach the Paris Agreement goals. And so for many urban cities, the best investment in terms of decarbonization and and health, of course, of the urban environment is to go for walking and cycling or promote walking and cycling.
Building on the same question, what I would like to understand is that there is a concept of livability that has gained quite some traction in recent years. So, can you just elaborate on what is this concept of livability and how do walking and cycling, these active modes of travel, how do they contribute to the livability of cities?
Yes, livability is central to the new ideas related to urban areas and cities. As the population of the world becomes increasingly urban, we find that cities exhibit a lot of stress signs, which relates to pollution, for example, congestion, noise. And so the quality of life within urban environment drops. And when that drops, of course, it has negative implications on public health. And so we find problems with physical health, but also mental health, as urban areas deteriorate in terms of the conditions that people live in. And so livability becomes a core concept that should drive all aspects of urban planning, whether it is land use, and we have these concepts of X-minute cities or 50-minute cities being promoted so that people can live close to all their services and be able to walk and cycle to all these services without having to catch a bus or a car. And then, of course, have also the transportation infrastructure that allows for this livability. And so our open spaces, our walking environments, the green areas around places where people live or where people work or where children go to school. And so bringing together all these elements are very important to make sure that urban areas, both now and the future, have high levels of well-being, and people can enjoy cities, reduce their consumption, reduce their impacts as well, especially with regards to emissions, and basically improve.
You talked about the concept of X-minute cities, which is quite a new concept, especially in case of developing economies.
Yeah.
And we see that many of the countries, be it cities from developed economies, have moved towards the concept of X-minute cities. Can you share some examples of infrastructural measures or policies that some countries have implemented and that have helped in promoting active mobility?
Yeah, so X-Minute Cities centers around concepts that allow for people to enjoy access to services without the need to, for example, own a car. And so there is a strong connection between land use and transport planning. I think Paris is probably one of the cities that has done a lot in trying to implement these plans for X-minute cities. And it's an effort that brings together the land use planning, so ensuring that there's a mixed land use distributed around the cities. And then, of course, provide for the infrastructure. And so people are not only able to reach services close by, but they're also able to reach those services close by through walking and cycling. I mean, one thinks that that is an easy thing, right? If you're walking, most cities you can walk, but there are various levels of walkability as well. And walkability is a very important infrastructure. We call it infrastructure, but it's a very important element of livable cities or even X-minute cities, because it is indeed walkability or the levels of walkability that will encourage, that will empower people to walk.
So, whenever we give these examples of policies, or let's say walking infrastructure you talked about, we mostly have examples from North American countries, or we have examples from European countries. What are the implications or opportunities or challenges that you see prevalent in the case of global south or developing economies to promote more walkability or let's say active mobility?
Yeah. So there are very good examples also on the global south. If you see cities like Bogota in Colombia, they have implemented extensive cycle paths as a follow-up to probably also the COVID-19 pandemic. So the ciclovia, the extensive bicycle lanes across the city, has seen a huge support infrastructure for active travel. And so there are also very good examples in the global south of cities that have been very proactive, but also those that are planning to. And the opportunity, I think, or the biggest opportunity within the global south is the current modal split. So people are already walking a lot. They have also a longer history of cycling or two-wheeler use. And so taking on that opportunity and ensuring that that model split, that high share of active travel within global south city is retained through good infrastructure. So, making sure that there are safe passageways, that there is proper lighting, that there is a network both for walking and cycling that connects places. Because at the moment in some global south cities, you cannot even see a safe walking infrastructure. There is a side of the road, but there is no physical infrastructure that segregates the people from the cars. So we did a study comparing Bogota, Freetown in South Africa. And then we also did this for Malta. Bogota had a very high percentage of infrastructure for cycling. Malta did not fare that well in terms of infrastructure. There was more infrastructure for car than there was for active travel. And then the difficulties in cities like Freetown, where we could not even find the actual infrastructure because it is not formal, it's still informal infrastructure. And so it gives rise to issues like safety, especially gendered safety for women walking alone without proper lighting. So there are a number of issues that need to be tackled, which are in concept they're the same as as the global north. The issue of gender and safety, lighting, these are all the same everywhere in the world. But in some areas, they become critical to ensure accessibility and social justice for those that are outside the car.
So when you talk about these issues, let's say the issue of women's safety in public transport or other needs, let's say the need for walking infrastructure or cycling infrastructure, these are the issues that we are facing everywhere, be it north or south. And one important aspect here is to understand the needs of the people.
Yeah.
So this brings me to a question where you have heavily worked, which is citizen engagement. What do you mean by it, and why is it so important to understand and involve citizens in planning of urban mobility and infrastructural projects?
Yes. So we engaged heavily with citizens because in one of the projects that we were looking at, we found that at the initial stages of the research, we found that in most literature and in most engineering approaches to walking and cycling, people were looking at quite objective walkability. And so drawing up checklists of how wide is the pavement, how segregated it is, how clean it is, are there obstacles, which are all fine and good from an engineering and a technical perspective. But we also found that there were other things that people thought about the urban environment, which were not captured by these objective indicators. And so we started looking at bottom up approaches to understand, um, more subjective walkability elements. We wanted to understand why people walked in certain places. We wanted to understand why, even though the infrastructure did not exist, people still walked, and what kept people away from walking in certain areas that had the infrastructure. And so, trying to understand these elements and identifying the needs, as you said, were very, very important for us. And in doing the project, we used a citizen science approach, or we engaged with people to send us their photographs of their walking environments, tell us what they felt when they were walking, whether they were feeling safe, whether they were feeling comfortable, whether they thought the place was vibrant or dull, whether they felt the place as pleasant. And so we looked at feelings of people whilst they were walking, and then we asked them to identify the elements that made up that feeling. And so if a place felt safe, we found that there was a strong correlation with availability of pavements. And pavements became almost a symbol of all the work that we were doing, because we realized that there were places that didn't have pavements. There were places where the pavements were under-designed or badly designed. There were pavements that were not well maintained, and they continuously caused discomfort. And so the levels of walkability went down. And then we found other things like the presence of greenery, for example. People needed, and Malta is very hot, of course, in summer. So for us, shade is very, very important. If you are walking, you want to be able to feel a bit, a bit refreshed, because walking in the sun can be very hot. So we found all these elements in the research, and then we added those to, what we defined as perceived walkability. And we created an index. We created a map that basically brought together all these photographs, analyzed all the data that we collected through individuals, and then created these walkability maps around the university, but also across the whole island. So by engaging with individuals, we were able to see how people were happy to share their information. People were happy to allow us to, get a glimpse into their world, and also, collect data from people that are actually using the infrastructure, because sometimes policymakers are not always the ones that are using the infrastructure, or the designers are not the ones that are using the infrastructures. We find that in many surveys, people that tend to criticize the most are the people that tend to not use an infrastructure in actual fact. In our society, for example, the people that contribute most are the people in cars that are constantly, ensuring that the car infrastructure is good, but the less vociferous of those are the people that actually walk, the people that actually use public transport. And then when you survey those people, the reactions and the feedback is very, very different.
Yeah. So I would like to continue forever, but this has been a fascinating discussion. But before we wrap up, any final thoughts on how people, stakeholders, policymakers can come together and promote the active modes of travel?
Oh, there is plenty of opportunity for interacting and encouraging active travel. So, apart from infrastructure, there are a number of other elements that we need to contemplate and take into consideration in cities. And this relates primarily to issues of well, livability first and foremost. So are we making sure that we have equal access for everyone? Are we ensuring that our urban environments are suitable for all ages and for all able people? Are we ensuring that there are measures put in place for safety, for example? We find that in certain areas walking does not happen, and it is obvious that it is not happening because there are concerns. There are concerns whether it is because the infrastructure is poor, or because the place is not clean, or because it is not safe, or because it doesn't have any light. And so you need to help to take quite a sort of holistic approach when it comes to active travel, and link it to issues of equity, making sure that, as much as we're providing for the average 40-year-old who is able to drive, we are providing for the elderly, because this is a reality in most global north cities, and probably also in the global south cities, where we have increasing old age, and also children, because what we lose in terms of city environments is children's independence. It is one of the unfortunate consequences of automobile cities. The children are unable to walk, they're unable to go to school by themselves, they are unable to access services by themselves. And so we push their age of independence, independent walking, to much, much later. And that has consequences on their social well being, on their ability to navigate places, on their confidence of navigating places. So we really need to work holistically and bring together all the stakeholders, not only the politicians, but also the people on the street, to be able to ensure that our urban environments are indeed livable from all different types of perspectives.
Thank you for joining us and your fascinating insights. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to know more about WSSTL, you can visit us on our website and follow us for future podcasts.